go to Europe next summer with our Sky Miles.
Yeah, that should be fun.
Dear Diane, learn more right after this. You messing up today. So yeah, we
Technical difficulty.
Already?
Apparently nothing is working in there.
Ah.
5, 4, 3.
Dear Diane, learn more right after this.
Good one, son.
Last summer, my new dad took me on vacation. First, we went deep sea fishing.
Wow! I'm so proud of you, son.
And then we went on Thunder Shark. That was awesome! Let's go again. 3 times. I gotta say, it was pretty cool.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of kids in foster care will take you just as you are.
Oh, not again.
Welcome to Community Watch. Greg.
Doc, how you doing, bro?
I'm all right. How are you?
Cooking with gas.
Good.
Cooking with
Good.
gas.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear
My
that.
granddad used to say that.
You know, I think my grandfather used to say that. What happened to that?
I don't know. Maybe we can bring it back.
You can bring it back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
bring it back.
can bring it back.
Yeah. Well, our guest today is an author of a book of letters from his time serving in the first Iraq War.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I had an opportunity to hear him speak at the college a few months ago, so I thought he would be excellent to talk to on the show.
Well, great.
But really, since I have arranged all this and you are the man with the service experience, I'm expecting you to ask all the questions.
That's no problem. I can do that.
Yeah, I figured you could. I figured you could.
We can do that. But it would be, I am looking forward to this show. You know, I was reading Mr. Bradshaw bio. And so it's just some things, the war, the first Gulf War has gone. It's been, we don't even think about it anymore, really.
Mm-hmm.
And for people that I don't think that served during that time. So it will be interesting to get some of his perspective years later and some of the stuff we have going on now. Just the whole mindset about it.
Well, our guest, Stephen Bradshaw, will be out with us in a minute right after this break, so don't go away. We'll be right back.
I'm transferring to the University of West Georgia.
Columbia University,
Kennesaw State.
UGA, Loyola University in Chicago,
Grambling State.
Shorter University.
I'm going to Greensboro College, and we all got our start at Georgia Highlands.
No matter where your educational journey takes you, you can get your start at Georgia Highlands College. Georgia Highlands College. Enroll, engage, excel.
Welcome back to Community Watch. We're very happy to have with us today Stephen Bradshaw. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You said to call you Stephen, but you are Captain Bradshaw.
I was a captain in the United States Army. That is correct.
I want to, I guess, get some background to what led you to decide to put these letters together in book form.
Sure.
Because the writing letters probably is something that a lot of our military did, but for you to make the decision that maybe I should put these in a book.
Mm-hmm.
What led you to that?
Well, you know, that was never my intent to begin with. When I got home from the Gulf in 1991, you know, just moved forward. I taught for 1.5 years at the Officer Candidate School and then resigned my commission and moved to Atlanta to start a career in business. And that chapter in the lives of me and my wife was pretty much behind us. I mean, my military service is always something close to my heart, but I kind of moved on. And one day a few years ago, I was down in our basement, you know, just cleaning up, something that I'd neglected for a while. And off in a corner in an unmarked box, I opened it much to my surprise and discovered every single letter I'd written to her while I was deployed. Now, this is 15, 16 years after the fact, and I had no idea she'd saved all these letters. And, you know, I can tell you I really didn't have any desire to go back and revisit that time. But curiosity kind of got the better of me, and, you know, it's an interesting exercise to go back and read your own words from so long ago. But what emerged out of that exercise was a narrative, a story arc of the emotional roller coaster that I was on as I went from landing in this desert, not really knowing what was happening day to day, to waiting month after month for some sort of guidance, to finally coming to the realization that, you know, we're not going to go home until we actually fight the Iraqi army, which is what we did. And the reason why, after going through it, we decided to put it in the form of a book is because, as you know, and at the time of the book's publication, you know, American soldiers were fully deployed in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And what we went through as a couple is still relevant. It's still salient for people today, and we thought that by sharing what we went through all those years ago, it would provide some measure of comfort to people going through the same thing right now.
Now, how long had you been in the military when you went overseas? Or you were in Germany as well.
Yeah, my first, I went on active duty in 1986. My first tour of duty was in the Federal Republic of Germany before the wall came down. So it was West Germany. And I was there for 3 years. A wonderful tour. I would highly recommend it. In fact, my wife and I were back in Germany this past holiday season for the first time in 25 years. So it was an amazing journey to go back and revisit some of those sites. But I returned home, went to my advanced tankers training in Fort Knox, and then went down for my next assignment at Fort Benning, Georgia, down in Columbus. And within a few weeks of my arrival there, Saddam Hussein decided to invade Iraq, and invade Kuwait, and set in motion everything that occurred since.
And was the practice of writing letters, did that start then, or I mean that was the or was that something you were used to doing?
Well, when I originally went to Germany, I wrote to my wife, you know, some, but you know, we could talk to each other over the phone then. So I didn't need to write her as often. So we had some, you know, letter correspondence during my first, I guess, 6-7 months in Germany. But you know, when I got deployed to the desert, there were no phones. At least for a while, there were no phones. So I started the habit of writing, you know, almost every day.
Now, Mr. Bradshaw, you know, listening to you speaking and talking about the letters, it's something about written communication, I think, first and foremost. But it's something else I think about it when you're actually in time when you're separated. And as you said, you could have conversations, but you can't go back and read those conversations. And like you know, when I was in the service, you know, you write all the time to your loved ones. And when you do visit those letters sometime, I know when I went back and read some of my letters, the growth that I saw in myself as a person versus when I wrote those letters. Did you experience some of that? Because it was kind of interesting that it was like it was a different person. I had grew up some.
Sure. That's a very good point. The letters themselves were eye-opening. You know, I'm fond of saying that I would read things and think to myself, you know, that was kind of forward thinking. You know, I was kind of thinking ahead. Other times I would read things and think, you know, I can't believe I was actually thinking that once upon a time, let alone put it down on a piece of paper. But you can't run from it. So in terms of evolution and growth, there's certainly plenty of that since then. But what struck me the most going back and reading them is how, I don't know what the right terminology is, but let's just say I'm not a mushy person, for lack of a better word, okay? So I'm fond of telling people all the time, I probably wrote things that I may have never actually said because of the extreme set of circumstances that caused me to be in the Middle East, you know, not knowing if I was ever going to come home, and her being in Columbus, Georgia, not knowing if I was ever going to come home. So that was really eye-opening for me.
But now, given that circumstance, but see, I think that's part of it, though. You know, when you in those circumstances, that we're somehow able to tap into a part of ourselves that we sometimes may normally are not comfortable with, or just accustomed to being that part of us. And you're right, because when you go back and read some of your letters, I know for me, you know, you really like. Sometimes it's a different person than who you actually are now. It's like, it's not me.
Right.
But at that time, it was very much so.
No question, no question. You're absolutely on point. Without question, you're absolutely right about that.
I'm curious, too, because there were, I mean, how much was there was a lag time
yes.
between.
Yes.
So.
It's funny you mentioned that, but
yeah.
Go ahead and ask the question.
So, well, I'm just wondering how that affected your back and forth, because I mean, by the time you get a response, you were in a completely different
that is
frame
correct.
of mind.
That is correct. So, you know, the only way I just addressed that by just, you know, writing on a pretty much daily basis. So whenever they got there, they got there. Whenever she responded to the one I'd sent is when it got back to me. But what was interesting was, for the most part, you know, mail delivery was excellent. You know, there were one or two hiccups whereby I remember this very distinctly. I got a letter from my wife saying, my friend Michelle and I had a great time at Mardi Gras in New Orleans. Didn't even know you were going to Mardi Gras. About 3 or 4 days later, I got a letter saying, Michelle and I are thinking of going to Mardi Gras for New Orleans for Mardi Gras. So it's like, oh well, that kind of happened. But the important thing was just staying connected. You know, the synchronization I couldn't control or manage, but it was important for me just to express myself and just write things down on an almost daily basis. It wasn't a 100% daily basis, but pretty close. And by the time the flow got going, you know, you can kind of keep track of it.
You know, I wonder if, even though you were writing these to your wife, if they didn't have kind of the effect that a diary would have.
I suppose that's true. That I wasn't cognizant of that at the time, but as I look back and read through it, it does to some extent come across that way, because it was, you know, I would describe the letters as, you know, 1/3 narrative of what actually was going on, you know, in the desert on a day-to-day basis, 1/3, you know, things I missed about being home, and 1/3, you know, the I love you part. But the narrative is very eye-opening to go back and read on a particular day. I was doing X or Y or Z, and what the command and staff meeting was like that day, or, you know, if a general came down to talk to the troops that day. So all of that, going back and reading that as it was happening, so to speak, was very eye-opening.
Now, you mentioned, you know, when the book came out with our current soldiers that was being deployed, did you find writing also was really a process of it was a therapeutic process? Even that connectedness, just writing and knowing there was someone else, you know, unlike a journal, unlike a diary when you're just writing for your own, writing knowing someone else would be reading that and you was connected to someone. Was that very therapeutic for you in that time?
Extremely therapeutic. Extremely therapeutic. Just knowing that what I was feeling was being conveyed to somebody that I loved and cared about was very important. It was the one thing that kind of kept me grounded and on track. And, you know, at some point you realize that your fate is not completely in your own hands anymore. And it was comforting to know that, you know, I said what I needed to say to the person I cared about the most, and I could go about doing my duty without any obstructions or mental distractions. And I'll just add this, at some point, it goes to show how entrepreneurial some folks can be, but at some point I remember we'd been out in the desert for 3-4 months, and AT&T managed to get a phone bank up out there. I mean, it was amazing. A big old tent, and I forget how many phones they had, but it was pretty amazing where you could actually call home. And I remember I probably drove by that tent for 2 or 3 weeks. I was really worried that what hearing my wife's voice would do to me in terms of my headspace, what I call the warfighter's headspace. So I didn't call her. I just continued our letter writing. And finally, I realized it would probably be a good thing for me to go ahead and give her a buzz. And the first time, I was thinking about, okay, what's the difference in time between Saudi Arabia and Columbus, Georgia? And I don't want to wake her up, although I'm sure she'd be happy to hear from me. But the first time I called home, I got a voicemail, and I just left a brief message, probably about 25 or 30 seconds, just wanted to touch base. I'm fine. You won't believe this, but they've got phones out here in the middle of nowhere now, and just wanted to tell you I loved you. And I recall when I got back, my wife told me that she was heartbroken that she'd missed my call, number one, but she probably listened to that voicemail 50, 60 times, and cried every single time. So, that strain that separation induces is pretty powerful.
We need to take a quick break here. We'll be back right after this with a lot more, so please stay with us.
Hey everybody! Heart disease affects 1 in every 3 women in America, but you can fight back. There's no time to lose. Mothers, sisters, daughters, families, and friends, it's time to shout louder, stand stronger, and demand change. Let's go!
To the Batmobile. Dang it.
To the invisible jet.
Dang it.
Together, we can put an end to heart disease. It's time to go red for women.
I could use your help.
Learn more from the American Heart Association at www.goredforwomen.org.
Welcome back to Community Watch, and you're looking at a copy of Dear Diane, Letters from the First Gulf War, written by our guest today, Stephen Bradshaw. We definitely need to tell people how they can get a copy of one of these great books.
Sure. You can get it from the book's website, which is www.deardianebook.com. And if you order via the website, I'll autograph it before it leaves our distribution center, and you can get it on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com.
Yeah.
So,
But you recommend they get it from the website?
well, I mean that's very direct, and that way I guarantee to personalize it, but because it'll ship from a location that's close to me. But
and it's an impressive website.
well, that's nice of you to say.
Well, it is. It's a very
Check it
handsome website.
I appreciate that.
Before we was taking a break, I was just thinking, currently, the whole writing process, as you said, was therapeutic for you. I know it was therapeutic for me, being a young man out to sea, doing the Gulf Storm and all this, the Desert Storm and doing all this thing. Just knowing you belonged, had someone else, that grounding feeling. But I'm wondering why we don't write as much now as a society, knowing it's not just, it's something about communication that still, it felt more lifelike to me, the writing, versus the actual live conversation. And it seems like it's something we've lost as a society. I just don't know that we write letters as much anymore. And it's like, so I wonder that level of communication that you get from writing a letter, are we losing something?
You're absolutely right. Letter writing is becoming a lost art. A letter, if it's constructed right, is a story arc, and you have to think through what you're writing and choosing your words carefully, and that's something that's lost in back and forth extemporaneous communication, because you're just reacting. You're reacting to what you're hearing, and you're responding to what you're hearing in real time. But a letter, when you sit back and reflect, this is what I want to say, this is how I want to say it, this word versus that word conveys the exact point I'm trying to make. It's really a lost art, and I talk about that a little bit in the introduction without trying to sound too old-fashioned or bemoaning that we've evolved technologically, because you can't stand in the way of technological evolution. That would be kind of foolish. But it would be a wonderful thing if folks, just took the time to write letters. I know a handwritten note, a handwritten letter is extraordinarily impactful. And I think it would be even more so now because people just don't do it anymore.
Dean of Humanities, what's your perspective on this?
Well, I'm just, some of the books that I've enjoyed the most are collections of letters, especially some of the great authors. After usually, often after they've passed, their letters are collected and published, and you learn so much more about the person than in a traditional biography. And it's sad to say that your book may be one of the few.
That's right, maybe one of the last of its kind, because people just don't write letters anymore. But it was so interesting. I've had several folks, after reading it, actually sat down and wrote me a handwritten letter, which was pretty cool. I thought that was cool. So obviously that notion resonates for people.
Now, when you in the beginning you said you felt it was very relevant at the time that the book was published.
Sure.
Have you received feedback from men and women in the service during that time?
I've received some feedback from current people deployed, but the most feedback I've gotten, the most salient feedback, is from other veterans. Particularly, I've had a lot of interaction with Vietnam era veterans, and one of the most poignant experiences I had was with a World War II veteran. And if y'all allow me to share this with you, I won't forget this as long as I live. I'd given a little talk down in Warner Robins, Georgia, and that's a pretty big military community as well. And after my talk, this older gentleman came up to me, and I could tell he was at least 85, 90 years old. And in my talk, I talk about the stress that, not only my wife was under, but my mother was under, because I was in the Gulf, my older brother was in the Gulf, my younger brother was at the National Training Center in California preparing to go to the Gulf. So essentially all three of her sons were potentially in harm's way. And I'm sure that was extremely hard on my mom. But this gentleman came to me afterwards and he said, Steve, I just wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed your talk, and I wanted to tell you that I'm a veteran. I served during the World War II era, and I thanked him for his service. And he said, and my brother served as well, and my brother got killed, in the Battle of the Bulge. And I just wanted to thank you for making me think of my brother today. Now, this is a gentleman who's 85, 90 years old, talking about something that occurred 60, 65 years ago, and it was emotional for him, and it was emotional for me that he thought of his brother and how much he still missed him all these years later. So that's very, very powerful.
Well, I'm guessing that is the kind of thing that your book would bring out, because it's about maintaining connections.
It is. Now, there's a flip side to that. I can relay another story that kind of shows the strain on relationships. I was at another event. This gentleman came up to me afterwards, and he told me he'd flown helicopters in Vietnam, and he'd written to his wife while he was deployed. And he gets home after his tour of duty in Nam, and the next day his wife asked him for a divorce. She'd had enough. And and he went on to say, a few years later I found a great woman, I married her, we're still married to this day. But there was something about getting dumped the day after he'd returned from Vietnam, 35, 40 years later, that it really, I could tell it was still a blow, as it would be for any of us to go through that kind of ordeal, to come back to the person that you love and for her to say, I'm kind of ready to move on. So that strain is palpable, and I think that's the story that kind of goes underreported, because that happens. That's not uncommon. It really isn't. Where, you know, and especially you think about if you're a private or a corporal or even a lieutenant, you're in your early 20s. If you've just gotten married, you've only been married a little while. Your wife's in her early 20s, and we're married, but you're gone like 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 15 months. What am I supposed to do? And you know, things happen. Things happen, and you know, we know people who that happened to.
Now, in talking about relationships, so what was I'm interested in the process for you and your wife in the construction of this book, because she's just as much a part of this book.
She is. She is. I always say my wife had final veto authority on everything that's in there. You know, there are certain things that she didn't necessarily want, and I deferred to that, but it's 98% exactly what I wrote, you know, all those years ago. But the process was extremely emotional. You know, I remember sessions with my editor, and you know, we'd finish a session and she and I would both be crying. My wife would come home and put in her 2 cents. After about 20 minutes, she'd be crying. I was like, wow, this is wearing us out here. But you know, that exercise was, you know, we think it was important to share it, because you know, that's what people go through. We always say we support our soldiers and we support their families, but they go through a lot. It's an enormous sacrifice, and the strain is pretty incredible. So, and I really feel for the soldiers that have, you know, been deployed during, we'll call it the years of the War on Terror, where they've had multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, and the strain that puts on home life is pretty severe.
I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I wonder if through the appearances that you make promoting the book and speaking, if you don't really have kind of a regular contact with veterans, younger veterans who have come back recently, and see how they have managed with their experience. I'm sure you go through that frequently.
Yeah, I've had a few veterans, younger era veterans, in some of the classes that I've taught, and their experiences are always very interesting. I tend to be more interested in the combat experience personally, because it's a different, you know, the war that we've been fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan is very different than the Gulf War in terms of the strategy and what they were asked to do. But in terms of relationships, yeah, the same feelings are there, absolutely. And you know, some of them are married. Most of them, the guys I run into though, are single, and you know, they start relationships when they get back.
Well, we're going to have to take another break coming up. When we come back, we'll give you again the information that you need to get a copy of Dear Diane, and I know you'll want that, so get something to write with, and we'll be right back after this.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back to Community Watch. We've been talking with Stephen Bradshaw, the author of Dear Diane, Letters from the First Gulf War, and you're looking at a page from the website, which is where you can go to get your own copy, personalized copy of the book. And what is the web address again?
www.deardianebook.com.
deardianebook.com. And so you can get a book, and there's some other interesting things posted, and a lot of comments, a lot of responses to the book. We appreciate you being with us.
My pleasure.
Today.
Thank you all for having me.
And we appreciate all of you for being with us this week on Community Watch. We'll see you next time.